Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to session 4A of the Scite Summer Bootcamp. As you can see on your screen here right now, we're in the specialized applications part of our bootcamp series, and happy that you've joined us again today. I can definitely see quite a few names that I already recognize here in the attendee list. Okay, so let's look at the next slide here. After, covering AI fundamentals, prompting techniques, and advanced strategies. Oh, sorry, Sean, would you mind advancing just one slide here? There you go. Perfect. So as you know, we've talked about AI fundamentals. We've talked about prompting techniques. Last time we had advanced strategies, kind of like behind the scenes look with Dom. And then today we're diving into one of the most practical and pressing topics for our academic community, which is how to effectively integrate AI tools in educational settings. And then for those of you who have been following along, as you can see, and as I mentioned, this is part A of kind of like this final session 4 split session. And then next Friday, we'll have part B, which is focusing on AI for corporate research. But today is all about the classroom experience. All the recordings, if you missed any of the last sessions, are available. So Alejandro from our team, he'll probably just add that in the chat here in just a moment. Okay, so as you know, or probably know, if you've attended 3 or more sessions, you're eligible for the official AI for Research certificate, which you can see displayed here. So let me launch a quick poll just to understand where everyone stands right now, how many sessions you've attended, and if you'd like to request to receive your certificate. Okay, launching right now. Okay. So you can say how many sessions you've attended. If you haven't been able to attend a few, because I know sometimes the time zone gets tricky. We have some folks even from the other side of the world attending. You can fill that out, or maybe you did attend them, but there's not necessarily like a use case for the certificate. So really curious. And today's session, of course, counts as one of those 3 live sessions to attend. And then the next one, next Friday, will also count. So if you've attended one and you still have today and next week to go, you can definitely still apply to receive the certificate. Okay, cool. I'll just leave that open here for another second. Let's look at the next slide here. So continuing our tradition, as you already know as well, for thanking you for your time and engagement, we have another raffle prize today, and today's lucky winner will receive a $100 hotels.com voucher, which is really perfect if you want to plan that weekend getaway or some end of summer travel. So as usual, after this session, I'll let the lucky winner know who has won and send you the voucher directly. Okay, so let me introduce our expert who you can already see here as a preview on our call today. So I'm really excited to have Professor Sean Reif joining us today. Sean brings a very unique dual perspective to the discussion. He's both the co-founder at Scite as well as professor of psychology at Murray State University. Anything you'd want to add to that introduction, Sean?
No, that's pretty much tells the story. So happy to be here. Happy to bridge the gap between academia and what we're doing with Scite.
Awesome. Great to have you. Okay, so before Sean kicks things off, last one from me here, I'd love to get a pulse on where our audience, where all of you stand, and really what kind of concerns you the most regarding AI and large language models in academia right now. So I just ended the other poll, and I'll pull up this new one and I'll share the results with all of you so you all can also kind of like understand where other people stand. So the options you can see here are university reputation risks from undetected AI-generated research papers, faculty struggling to adapt assessment methods to an AI-enabled world, difficulty verifying originality of graduate thesis or dissertation work, or anything else, and feel free to add that in the chat. I'll take a look here to see if we have any comments here as well. Data leaks, yeah. I'm sure Sean is nodding, so yeah. I think my concern is how to teach students to use it responsibly. Perfect, love that. So definitely here at the right place. Privacy issues, concerned that it cuts into the value of the credentials, copyright issues, responsible use, copyright law infringement, environmental impact. Yeah, that's something we've heard before as well. All of the above, cybersecurity data leaks. Awesome. Yeah, these are all definitely concerns that I'm sure many people will resonate to. And Sean is nodding, so I think we'll be speaking to quite a few of those today. Let me share the poll results so you can get an idea here. And then Sean, the stage is yours. Okay, it looks like number one is faculty struggling to adapt assessment methods to an AI-enabled world, followed by difficulty verifying originality of graduate thesis and dissertation work. But it's like pretty evenly spread, to be honest, right? Well, thank you, everyone.
I'm actually surprised that the difficulty verifying thesis and dissertation work wasn't the number one. I thought that would definitely pop up well beyond everyone else. So good poll options there. Cool. Okay. Are we ready to move on, Julia, or is there anything else you needed to do before we get started?
Yep, stage is yours.
Excellent. Okay, cool. Well, yeah, thank you so much for setting all that up and for organizing everything, Julia. You've been very helpful. We really appreciate it and all your hard work. So, I'm going to talk today about some, well, exactly what we're seeing here, challenges that are facing sort of modern academia with relation to some of these new technologies. What the term that I'm going to use sort of as an umbrella term is just text generative AI. So I'm talking about large language models, and of course there are other types of generative AI, but the kind that we work with at Scite is generating text. And that's, I think, the kind that's most relevant in an academic setting, in terms of assessment, in terms of, the production of knowledge. And, this really just comes down to a lot of, redounds to a lot of, challenges that are really facing the academy in 2025. So, first and foremost, these tools are raising a lot of questions about research integrity. There are certainly lots of papers, or I'll call them papers, I'll put them in scare quotes, that are basically products of AI that have been published in less than reputable outlets. That's a problem. As we were talking about with our poll just a minute ago, verifying the integrity of sort of capstone projects like dissertations and theses is a concern. And of course, all this, really comes down to, affecting the reputation of institutions. But at the same time, you have some other issues that have been with us even longer, like information overload. I mean, I, as a professor and researcher, have felt this basically my entire career, and it's only gotten worse. It seems like every year it gets worse in terms of the amount of information that, I feel like I need to keep up on in order to be an effective researcher and an effective professor. It is just sort of really getting out of hand and difficult to keep up with. Also, issues of access to scholarship, which can become fragmented. And then, that really thing that has been with us at least for the past 15 years, talking about, reproducibility. Some of you may be familiar with the term replication crisis, where a lot of research can't be replicated. We're still dealing with a lot of those issues. And again, coming down to the quality of the work that we're producing. So these are all issues that we'll touch on, I think, in multiple ways during today's talk, and we'll of course have time for questions at the very end. I want to start by just sort of getting some assumptions. This is something I do with my students all the time. I say, let's state our premises. Let's state where, sort of the assumptions that we make about everything. And so these are some assumptions that I'm going to make today about, these are things that are true of me, and these are things that are true of my colleagues at Murray State. And these are things that I think are almost certainly true for basically everyone, on this webinar. We assume that text generative AI is here to stay. This is a technology that is, as I like to say, it's too good not to use, and it's going to be part of the way that we navigate the world, whether we like it or not. And along with that, there's the assumption that my students, your students, or the students that you interact with at your institutions are going to use text generative AI, and in fact, they already are. this is actually so I've ever since ChatGPT made its big splash. I've done this sort of informal exercise every semester. I'll go in and I'll ask students, hey, how many of you have used an AI writing tool on an assignment? And at first it was a few timid hands kind of raising up a little bit. Now it's gotten into a third, sometimes half, or even more, depending on the class. We'll just say, yeah, no, I've done that. And there's a variety of responses that I get in terms of whether or not the professors are kind of on board with that. But the point being that I think those those sort of survey questions, and we have data that indicate a range of percentages from 40% all the way up to 70% of students who will say, yes, I've used these kinds of tools for class assignments. But I think those are almost certainly undercounts, and so we have to assume that this is a pretty widespread practice. It's also the case that this is technology which is really increasingly present in the workforce. So, it's not just the case that this is something that is going to be a variable in the college experience or even the grad school experience, but also in the experience just in everyday working life. So, your students who are undergraduates today are going to be going on into the workforce and competing with other candidates for jobs who are also using this technology. And, I don't want them to be at a disadvantage. Same thing for graduate programs. I'm also assuming that generative AI is a useful technology, and this is, even if it's something as simple as I've just added to my university email account this tool that will read an email for me, and it will draft a reply based on the kinds of replies I tend to draft, and it gets better the more you use it. This is incredibly useful to me because I spend like a third of my life answering university emails, as I'm sure a lot of you can relate to that. So it's a useful technology. And then, finally, look, we all care. This is the one that gets the most uptake, obviously, is that we all care about our students and we want to do a good job teaching them or aiding in the instruction of students at our institutions. If you're, a librarian who maybe doesn't teach students in a classroom directly, we all want to, help the people at our institutions do their jobs and care about our students and do a good job teaching them the material, preparing them for their future, whatever that entails. So now exactly, of course, the rest of this will all be about how we do that, right? How is really where the sort of questions start to arise. I want to talk real quick. When I've talked about this in the past in smaller groups, sometimes I would push the sort of elephant in the room toward the very end, and I've since decided no, it's better to get this out of the way and talk about it, as loudly as possible in the very beginning. Let's talk about cheating. It is undoubtedly the case. I don't think anyone would ever deny that this technology can be used to cheat on writing assignments, excuse me. And the thing that, this is nothing that I say here is going to be groundbreaking on this topic of cheating, but I do like to point out, and I think that it's helpful to remind ourselves that cheating is not a new problem. Cheating on writing assignments is not a new problem. At my institution, we have Turnitin, which will evaluate and upload a paper that's been uploaded for text reuse. If it sees text, plagiarism, if it sees that, it will flag the paper. And I use Turnitin all the time. I have in the past, and it's a very useful tool. And I have failed students as a result of Turnitin results. So it's certainly useful in that sense. But even with tools like Turnitin, you still have students who are paying someone to write a paper for them, or more commonly having their friend, roommate, boyfriend, girlfriend, spouse, parent write papers for them. This has been going on probably back in the Lyceum. This was going on in some way, right, in ancient Greece, right? So like, this is not a new problem, and we all kind of accept grudgingly, but we do recognize that some forms of cheating will take place, but we can't really detect them. The thing that's new is that this technology makes cheating more common, but only, and this is what I like to emphasize, this is only going to be more common if professors continue to teach and assess in the ways that we've always taught and assessed. And so, the point that I've tried to make today is going to be that, really, these are some things that we need to change. Here's some ways that we can change what we do to make room for this new technology and even use it to our advantage and to the advantage of our students. Along with that sort of notion of cheating, comes the question of, look, can't we just detect when students are using this technology and just ban them? Much as ban the behavior, do what we do sort of with Turnitin, where it's, well, I can see where you've copied from other places. I can see that you've used ChatGPT, and so that's a failing grade, and here are the repercussions. I dislike this approach for a number of different reasons. The first and sort of most, I guess, easiest one is just that this is a cat and mouse game. So you end up in this sort of situation where, most of you are probably aware these models, these large language models are changing constantly. There are new versions, new iterations of these models that are being developed all the time. And then you have the case where the detection of the use of those models is sort of catching up to them all the time, and I just don't view that as a valuable way to sort of spend our life. And the bigger issue is simply the issue of false positives. The idea that a student might turn something in, it might get flagged as AI generated. Um, Student faces repercussions as a result of that. The idea that might happen to a student who actually did not use AI when they weren't supposed to is just unacceptable to me. I would rather have 100 students get away with cheating than have one student get falsely accused and suffer repercussions for cheating when he or she didn't do that. And if you look at the various products, again, Turnitin has their technology that will detect the use of AI writing, and they're very explicit about it. In saying this should not be used as the sole determinant of whether or not AI was used in a writing assignment. So I think that's that basically calls out the idea that we're going to be able to sort of slam the lid on this technology. But it's also the case, that this is becoming the norm, and students need to know how to employ these tools ethically and effectively. There is some interesting developments or some interesting thinking about what's, I guess, commonly called watermarking, being the idea that you could, in theory, have AI tools insert some pattern of text that they could then have a record of, and that could be detected later. That's interesting. I'd have to see how it was deployed and how much uptake you got with the people who are actually producing those products in order to have a good idea of whether or not I thought that was an interesting or a useful way of detecting the use of AI writing tools. But I don't think we're there yet. So we're still sort of in this world where the technology exists and we have to figure out how to deal with it. Okay, so let me start by asking a question that and I'm happy to to come circle back to this question also at the end during Q&A, but I want us to think a little bit about why we assign papers, or why a professor at your institution might assign papers if you're not someone who's doing the assigning. And I think this sort of two basic categories that I have in my head of why I assign papers as a professor is, one, to get students to think carefully and critically about a given topic, and two, to assess the extent to which they can think critically about that topic. And so, I guess the point that I want to make here is that we shouldn't be simply assigning papers without an eye toward what we're trying to accomplish. And this is not even just regular, this is not even just like a term paper. This could be something as simple as a homework assignment, a simple short writing assignment. Why are we doing that? And it's just kind of funny. It's like, sometimes when I talk to folks I've occasionally gotten the response of, well, just because you need a paper. Why do we assign papers? Well, because we assign, that's what we do. there has to be a deliverable at the end, and that's always a paper. And it might continue to be a paper, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. And there might be other ways of doing what we've done previously with something like a term paper in other ways. And so we'll get at a few of those examples here in just a minute. Throughout my talk here today, I'll be referring primarily to Scite Assistant. So Scite Assistant is Scite's text generative AI product. The idea is it uses the same large language model technology that you get with ChatGPT, Claude, others, the same kind of basic LLM experience, but it uses Scite's data, which is all scholarly data, most of it peer reviewed. It uses that data from scholarship to actually derive answers to a given question, or to provide the basis, the factual grounding for the response. And the idea is that by doing that, you've got a tool that's designed for research. So I'll be using sort of Scite Assistant as my go-to mental framework for this. A lot of what I say can also be applied to other AI writing tools. But just to sort of, table set a little bit here, Scite Assistant is good at things like summarizing research on a given topic. It's great at identifying trends and emerging areas of research. I was doing just the other day, it was a concept that was sort of emerging. So I teach a course on moral psychology, and there's a sort of new line of research that I actually had not been terribly familiar with on that. And it gave me a great list of new papers that I was able to go to and then pick, here's the one that I want to assign for my seminar. So it's good at that. It's good at answering, sort of empirical questions. If you've got a question that can be answered with like scientific research, it's good at doing that. And it's good at providing a source, a reference that you can point to as the source of that information. As well as identifying controversial topics or questions in a given area, or even something like brainstorming research ideas. I actually had a student last semester who had this idea for a study, and he was able to explain it to me. It was this experimental study of basically ideology and visuospatial representations. I won't go into detail, but I had not heard of this methodology. It was really kind of new to me. And so I just went into Assistant and said, look, here's the study design. Who has done stuff like this? And it was able to point me to answers, which is something that previously I never would have been able to really do, certainly not in like a 5-minute session of lit searching. With that in mind, there are some other things that Assistant is less good at. For example, writing entire papers. This is something that other AI tools might actually be a bit better at. Assistant is probably less good at producing an entire, say, term paper. You're going to see a lot of, these second and third bullet points. The theme is around originality. So developing really original, creative, brand new theories or good novel hypotheses or research questions. It can help you brainstorm, but it's not necessarily going to be able to come up with something out of whole cloth. The kind of, thinking, the kind of thing that happens when I wake up one morning and I'm brushing my teeth and I'm just sort of thinking, early in the day, and I'm like, what if we did, what if X causes Y, or what if X is associated with Y? That sort of out of the clear blue sky thing, it's going to have less sort of skill with. And then, identifying gaps in the literature, it can do some of that, but related to the above, not necessarily perfect at identifying new avenues. So there are ways that we can leverage this sort of combination of, a thing that it's good at and some things that it's less good at, to modify the way that we, approach student work, we approach the classroom, approach assignments, the way that we basically interact with people at our institutions. So there are a number of things that I'll get to that are sort of specific. And this is really getting down to sort of brass tacks. For one, AI specific assignments. So there there are ways that you can actually build up assignments that do require the use of an AI tool. And so this is something that I started doing a couple of years ago, I guess, a year and a half ago. So for example, I have one assignment that I give. So I teach a lot of research methods courses. Our senior level research methods course, I teach. It's where students will actually go through this process of reviewing the literature, coming up with their own hypothesis, designing a study, collecting data, analyzing it, compiling. In the past, it was a term paper. Now it's a presentation. I'll talk more about that in a second. But as part of that class, I have this assignment that I call documenting the journey. And basically what I have students do is I have them, sit down and actually start querying Scite Assistant. They all get Scite Assistant because I'm their professor. So they all start querying Scite Assistant about the topic that they're interested in. I then have them keep a log of what questions they're asking, what answers it's giving, what research that they're taking away from that, what actual first order, primary source material they're getting as adding to their reading list as a result. And then why. So the idea is to force them to sort of critically engage with the tool. And, this is another thing that I do, which is sort of related to the second point there is I have them start this assignment in class. So I've done a fair amount of, shifting, especially with that methods class, because it is the one sort of last class that I teach that is really sort of reading and writing intensive. They're all reading intensive, but writing intensive. And I'll have them actually complete that assignment. It's a small section, 15 students. They're on their computers and they're completing that assignment. And I'll wander the room and I'll help them, answer questions. Oh, it gave you that answer wasn't really helpful. Try reframing it this way. Ask it specifically about these variables. So I can kind of walk them through that process. And the idea is transparency, and they can be straightforward in terms of how they're using the tool, and I can help them see some of the positives and negatives and the advantages and the shortcomings of using that AI technology. We also, as I was mentioning earlier, we can sort of flip this. If you want to flip your classroom, this is a great opportunity to do it. I've not so much flipped the classroom, but I have really shifted toward a more interactive mode of instruction for the more writing intensive courses that I teach, in that I want them to do more writing in class and more reading and searching out literature in class. So that's just a reality. If I'm there helping them do it, then there's less of a chance for misuse of the technology because everyone's kind of doing it together, and I'm not looking over their shoulder, Big Brother style, but I'm there. I'm there to lend a hand. Another big thing is simply using the technology as an aid in reading. So you're reading a paper. This is something that I do as professor. I'm reading a paper in my area. Even now and then, I'll come across a theory or a phrase or a method that I'm not familiar with. And the previous way of dealing with that is you would pull out your phone, pull up your laptop, and Google it. Right. What I try to encourage students to do is to really use Scite Assistant as an aid in reading. So if you come across a theory or a finding that you're not familiar with, and if these are undergraduates, that's going to be a lot. That's a great opportunity to pull up Scite Assistant and ask it. And the advantage that you get is that whereas Google or ChatGPT is going to source their answer to that question from sort of public facing, sites, Wikipedia, Reddit, that kind of thing. Scite Assistant is going to go to the actual, first order scholarly research. And so it'll, sort of drive students in that direction. So, this I think can be a great aid in the reading and note-taking process. The overall goal and what I try to do, in terms of my philosophy here is, we want to show students how these tools can be used responsibly for a better class experience and for better grades. Um, the way that I frame this is sort of a carrot and stick approach. I always say, look, Is it the case? And I'm upfront about that. Can you use this technology to basically do the work for you? Sure. And you might get a passing grade doing that. Or you can use it and learn some skills, be better at what you're doing, and use this technology to not just get out of the assignment, but to actually get an A. Um, this sort of gets into my general policies. I should have included the full text. So in my syllabus, I think most of us probably who are teaching, and most institutions have recommendations at this point of syllabus language about how to use these tools. From the student's perspective, and I have colleagues in our department who say no, 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 and also no, never. My syllabus, I say yes. I have a blanket policy of yes, but I have two caveats to the yes. One is I say, if you use an AI tool, which you are allowed to do, if you use an AI tool, you just got to tell me which one you used and just briefly give me a sentence describing how you used it. That's it. That's all you got to do. And two, every once in a while, I might give you an assignment where I'm going to say no. I'm going to say for this one, no AI. And usually I will, in the typical course, um, 200, 300 level, certainly at the 400 senior level courses, I'll maybe have at the senior level, maybe 2 assignments out of, a dozen, where I say no. And I'll talk in a minute about, sort of revising assignments that we create with AI in mind. But the idea is that I'm allowing you the use of this technology, but the trade-off there is that sometimes I'm going to ask you not to, and I'm going to ask you to respect that. And in my experience, on average across, say, homework assignments for a given, let's say, upper level class, I see students, especially with revised assignments that I've really kind of, revised in a way to make them less amenable to the use of AI. I see maybe 15% at the most across an entire term of all those, that material that's been turned in has the caveat that, yeah, I used, ChatGPT to help me craft this response. Okay. And a lot of that, frankly, I should actually run the numbers. A lot of that is actually going to, instances where students say, yeah, all I did really was just help me, word my response better. Come up with a better, clearer way of wording my answer to this question. And frankly, I'm fine with that. I think that's a great way of using the tool. There's this sort of continuum from, technology aided writing, and it starts with the spell checker. Right. So, I would be annoyed if a student didn't use a spell checker. It's like, are all these words misspelled? We've solved this problem. Grammarly is a thing, right? So there's a continuum, and that's a good way of using this kind of technology. Actually, I'm going to get to the modifications of out of class assignments here. Actually, in just right now. Actually, there we go. So how can we respond in terms of, out of class assignments or in terms of what we're asking our students to do? Some of this, I think, will be stuff that you're already doing, or we're already trying to do. So in a sense, I think that the existence of AI has really put us in the position of we really just have more of an incentive to do things that we probably already want to do or are already trying to do anyway, like making assignments as intrinsically interesting or personally relevant as possible. You can see I have a typo on my slide, make assignments as intrinsically. If I had used an AI tool, it wouldn't have done that. So I'm giving you an example of that right there. So just to cite one example, one of the courses that I teach is a senior seminar. It's on psychology and current events. And we talk about a lot of controversial issues in there because controversial things are happening in the world all the time. And so the final like homework assignment that I give in there is one of those where I say no AI on this one, please. And their assignment is to have a conversation about a controversial issue with someone they disagree with. And in theory, could I ask ChatGPT to summarize that? Sure, you could. Um, and I don't doubt that, yeah, probably, some students might have done that. But I get great responses. I get great summaries of really good conversations on this assignment. And some students will turn in a recording of the conversation because they're interested in this exchange, and they want to show that they've done a good job. That's the kind of thing that I think actually serves multiple purposes. Yeah, it sort of it turns students away from using AI to just do the assignment, but it also makes the assignment something that they're more involved in or more interested in intrinsically, which is something that I want to do in the first place. You can also make assignments difficult to prompt engineer or to use an AI tool to complete. So, these are just a couple of examples from that same class I was just talking about, actually. So identify a story that recently appeared in the news that is related to one of the logical fallacies discussed in class. So two components to that. Something that happened recently, and one of the things that we talked about in class. Well, an AI tool doesn't know what was just discussed in my class. If you want to use an AI tool to complete that assignment, you have to tell it. Okay. It also is going to need to know like what's happened recently in the news. And last I tried this, it wasn't great. Actually, I don't know. Some of the new GPT models may be better at this. But last time I tried this, it wasn't great at identifying stuff that was happening recently and then tying it back to the list of stuff that I've given. But here's the point. In the time that it's going to take a student to provide the AI with all that necessary information, because if you turn in the assignment and it includes something that's not a logical fallacy or is not something that we talked about in class, sorry, that's not what I asked you for. So if in the time that it takes you to provide it that information, for most students, I could have just done the assignment. It's actually easier to just do the assignment than it is to get the AI to do it for you, right? Or something, again, speaking to that sort of personal relevance piece that I mentioned earlier, tell me about an instance in which someone experienced one of the biases that we talked about in this module. Well, again, we have the what do we talk about in this module component, but also this is something where someone gets to tell a story. And I always like this because, in addition to forcing them to sort of engage with the stuff that we've talked about in class, they're having to go back in their experience and think about stuff that's relevant to what they're learning. And again, could you ask an AI to do this? Sure. You'd have to tell it which cognitive biases you want it to reference, but you can have it do that. But for the most part, people are, generally inclined to talk about themselves and their experiences. And if you give someone an opportunity to tell a story, particularly a story that they find interesting about something that is intrinsically interesting, they're more likely to just do it. So that's just, a question of when we're coming up with our writing assignments, think about, okay, what are some ways in which this could be, completed with an AI tool, and how can I change it to make that more difficult? And I think we can get a lot of mileage out of that. It's not a cure-all. It's not perfect, but in the same way that in the past, 5 years ago, I was creating assignments with the knowledge and the understanding that students can Google things, and they're not going to not Google things. Now I just have to expand that and say, okay, students are going to ChatGPT things or Scite Assistant things, and that's just the world that we live in. A final note here, one more thing, and then a side note. So, this might be a really good time to rely more on in-class assessments. This is, I think, so when I started teaching in grad school 20 years ago now, um, it was the kind of thing where I could see people were moving towards more sort of out of class assignments, and I saw that gradually pick up the more the longer I was sort of in the academy, and then when I started teaching my own classes after I was completed my master's degrees and all that, I really started shifting more towards out of class assessments, just because I felt like they're a better, if I'm teaching graduate statistics, I want to replicate the sort of experience of having to analyze data for your thesis. And what's that experience like? Well, it's not sitting in a classroom taking a written exam. It's actually analyzing real world data in your apartment. Okay, fine. So we'll do that. We'll do that out of class. I think actually this is a great opportunity to bring back a lot of assessments back into the classroom. And I know this is a hard sell in some cases because a lot of us, myself included, feel like, gee, how am I gonna cram more stuff into that in class time? And so I understand that again kind of maybe is a question of like, okay, maybe do I want to consider flipping some classes, having an online lecture and then having more sort of an interactive experience in the actual classroom itself. Um, so, doing that, you might, start taking some exams that previously were like take-home exams, moving them back into in-class exams. Quizzes. I've started doing reading quizzes. So, we have assigned readings. One of the things that I hadn't done previously, and there's lots of reasons to do this. I now, hand everybody a sheet of paper, take, 5 minutes, summarize what this week's readings were about. Or what I'm doing in one of my seminars this semester, exit tickets, which is basically after the end of each class day or a selection of class days, have students just write down what's one thing you learned today, right? That's the kind of thing that you're asking them to actually just write it down. It's very topical. It's very relevant to what you're talking about, and it also has the nice feature of taking attendance if that's what you want to, if that's something that you're either required to do or want to do. So bringing stuff back into the classroom, I think, is an option. One thing that I will point out is Lockdown Browser or similar technology. This is where, for those of you who don't know, this is like where you're required to take an assessment with a certain version of a web browser that doesn't allow you to ever switch screens or do other things. I feel like this is probably going to cause more problems than it solves. There are lots of ways to get around Lockdown Browser limitations or the sort of implementations that they have. You can Google it or chat GPT it. Even, the procedure, I know some professors will have students, take their webcam and like swing it around the room so you can see the environment that they're in. Again, okay, if you're someone who's dedicated to cheating on an assessment like that, there are ways that you can do it that are not going to necessarily be detectable. So I feel like that's probably not the best approach. Couple final points. I want to ask ourselves, just sort of thinking aloud, and this is something that I'm happy to get feedback on too in the Q&A time, which we'll switch to in just a second. But look, is the age of the term paper over? That advanced methods class I was talking about this semester, no paper. I'm having them give a presentation. I'm going to have them turn in a reading list before their presentation, and I will be able to sit there and ask them about what they read, um, in person. So in that sense, it's more sort of like a really, really like mini, oral defense. We'll see how that goes. But I think, that's shifting the focus from a sort of capstone writing piece to, an equally useful skill, maybe even more useful, giving a presentation, and then giving students the opportunity to talk about it. I think there's a lot of opportunity to do some new stuff there that is sort of in place of the traditional term paper. You could even do, assignments that involve more than just writing. I have students who have done multimedia projects or, experiential assignments. I think there's a lot of opportunity for innovation there. Um, and then just as sort of a final note, and then we'll have an actual instructional scenario here. These are just some sort of general tips. This is actually from a paper that came out last year from some folks at Vanderbilt. Really great article. It's down there at the very bottom. Carol and Bortz. I'm not pronouncing the name correctly. But there's lots of stuff that you can do as an institution, as a professor, as a librarian to really help faculty or help your students integrate AI in a way that's effective. So things like training sessions for faculty and students, workshops about AI literacy, training modules that are specific to a discipline, you know, prioritizing AI tools that are designed for scholarly research and testing them in subject areas, recommending specific tools. Certainly, I think probably most people on this call already have some experience with institutional policies. You probably want some kind of disclosure requirements. I always tell my students, look, any ethical concern goes away with disclosure. Now, maybe if you disclose it, yes, I use ChatGPT to write this paper. Well, okay, that's going to cause you other problems, but it's no longer necessarily an ethical concern because you told me what you did, right? So disclosure requirements are really useful. Basically coming up with sort of guardrails or institutional guidelines about how to use this technology. And then maybe if you're trying to figure out, okay, how do we dip our toe into this? You can always start with pilot programs in select departments that are looking to do it. And then use that to sort of jumpstart everything, create comprehensive resources, and then sort of shift that into one-on-one consultations for faculty and building out those partnerships with other departments. And the final point on here, which I really want to emphasize, is we should always use this selectively rather than exclusively focusing on rather than exclusively, we want to focus on teaching really critical evaluation skills, like I was talking about earlier. That's the goal. Okay, so I want to leave time for our sort of interactive component here, and also some time for Q&A. So one thing that we can do, and I think Julia is going to jump in here and give us the opportunity to do this. So you can think of a traditional research assignment or maybe an exercise, an instruction session that you either give or have received. So if you're not in the classroom, that's totally fine. But maybe just think about that and then think about how you might redesign it to incorporate AI tools, maintain academic integrity, enhance those learning outcomes, and then share in the poll your original assessment or the session that you did, or how you would modify it for the AI era. And so, this is kind of harkening back to some of the examples that I gave earlier. For example, if you're a professor or an instructor, instead of just asking for a lit review, you can have students use Scite or another tool to identify gaps in the research and then verify findings through traditional databases or by going to the actual source material and looking at where the reference came from and validating that it is in fact telling you what the AI says it's telling you, right? This is the thing I try to emphasize all the time: trust but verify. Or if you maybe as a librarian, if you're giving like a database workshop, you can show how Scite complements, searches from like PubMed or Google Scholar by providing the citation context and then going through that verification piece. So, something like that doesn't necessarily have to be even that advanced. Those are, I guess, more complicated examples, but even, something simple from a much simpler, shorter assignment could be useful.
Yes, awesome. I know people have already seen this. I've just opened up the poll, so feel free to add kind of like the before and after, or really any other comment here. I've seen a few in the chat. Super interesting to just really read how you start or continue thinking about adjusting in the age of AI. So let's just give people a bit of time here. And as you think about that, I just also added a link in the chat, as Sean mentioned, that like the tips from the librarians at Vanderbilt University. We had a webinar with them like half a year ago, I think. Sean was on it as well. So I just added the link if you want to fill out the forum, so you'll get the replay. It's super interesting just to learn about how they did it, and then kind of like the framework that they used to implement AI, which has worked really well for them.
Yeah, a lot of good data in that paper, I believe, as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in fact, actually, I'm doing some work here at Murray State this semester with some of my fellow professors in our department. We're looking at, can you tell students not to use AI? Will they do it if you tell them not to? So come back at me like in the spring, and I'll have maybe an answer to that question.
Yeah, let's do it. We'll have a spring webinar here.
There you go. Perfect.
Yeah. Okay. The character limit is too slow. I think it was like the largest that I could select. So sorry if it's too much, then you can also add it in the chat here. Thanks everyone for filling in your comments. We'll try to share it as best as possible. I don't think you want to read through like over 100 responses right now, but we'll definitely make sure to share them on social or in an email later. So I'll just keep it open here. And just to move forward, I'd say, yeah, let's open the live Q&A. And I think I might have one more slide before we move into Q&A, right? Oh, there it is. Yeah. So the little quote here is actually something that one of the librarians on that webinar said. So head over there to the recording if you want to hear it firsthand. But yeah, if you're interested in bringing Scite to your school, to university, to your institution, I'm adding a link in the chat here right now. Feel free to reach out. Also, if you just like have any additional concerns, questions of how it could work, how others have done it, our team would be happy to assist you there. Okay, now questions. We definitely have a lot already, so Sean, buckle up. Okay, the first is, it seems like your main approach is to move things back to the in-person classroom, but what about online and asynchronous classes? That's really not an option. What can we do other than that?
Yeah, this is a great question. So the first thing that I would say about that is that in the context of online classes, some of what I said earlier does not necessarily apply, at least not in the same way. If you're teaching a fully asynchronous online class, for example, well, then you might have reason to think, okay, maybe I do need to rely on lockdown browser, even though if it's not going to save me, at least it will, it will provide some protection, right? Candidly, I don't really teach any online courses anymore, and I'm not the best teaching online, so I'm not the best person to ask about this. But I feel like you're really going to have like triple the motivation there to make the assignments intrinsically interesting. I think that is the main thing that I would go to is again, intrinsically interesting, intrinsically interesting. There are certain things that I think no one should be doing now, probably shouldn't have ever been doing. Maybe not ever. When I started the first online course I taught, our department had a requirement for discussion boards. I didn't do that, even though I was supposed to. Discussion boards probably are a no-go. They're just not going to accomplish anything. So yeah, experiential, maybe multimedia assignments might be useful. But again, candidly, I'm not the best person to ask because I don't teach online. So
Yeah.
sorry, I can't be more helpful with that.
I mean, it's a really good question. Maybe even some tips here in the chat from other attendees.
Please.
Okay, so the next one here, not trying to be rude, we welcome every question, so no worries there. I'm genuinely curious, how is Scholar GPT different from Scite Assistant? Sean, are you familiar with Scholar GPT?
I am not. I've heard of the name, I think, but I've not used it. So yeah, I'm going to be extra useless here too. Oh, right. This is ChatGPT's Scholar. I'm sorry. Now I'm remembering. Yeah. So the main thing that you're going to see in terms of the difference between Scholar GPT and Scite Assistant is going to be basically the material that it can reference. So Scholar GPT relies, I believe, if not exclusively, almost exclusively on open access papers or metadata like abstracts. I don't know. I know they have some relationship with Google Scholar, or they use Google Scholar to some extent, but I'm not sure exactly how deep that goes. The thing that's different about a Scite Assistant is that we actually have access to the full text of both open access and closed access paywalled papers. And so that's going to basically really expand the universe of information that you can get access to using Scite Assistant.
Awesome. Well, great question. I know that was one of the most upvoted ones, so thanks for speaking to that one. Focusing on process over product has been my go-to. I would love for an easy export from Scite that documents an entire chat process with the query, the search strategy, a list of filtered out articles, and the next query, the modified references list, and so on.
So yeah, no, this is a great idea. I think you can currently basically copy the text of the Q&A itself. Basically, I think you can copy all the things, but they're all separately. So what you're talking about is sort of a consolidated export, which is not something we really have sort of all in one place. That's a great idea. I'm happy to mention that to our product folks. I think, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, our product team is always curious about the Q&A, so we'll make sure that they receive this. Okay, I can see how an AI tool that helps summarize some academic research might aid a reader that is already familiar with the skills that come with reading academic texts. Is there a worry that such a tool would provide an experience for students that reduces the friction to such a degree that it offloads the cognitive work of coming to terms with academic research and writing?
Yes. Yeah, no, I mean, I think this is sort of if I had that's a really great sort of summary of the situation that we're all in, right? I guess the thing that I would kind of bring it back to that question that I had earlier of like, why are we doing any of this, right? If you're trying to get students to engage critically with the material and higher level concepts, you want them to be able to use the technology to aid in that endeavor. And, the analogy that I always give is, I think none of us are teaching students to use card catalogs today, right? That was an important part of the process of finding information at one time. It might be that the process of reading and writing, its role has really changed. Maybe that reading writing skill component is no longer as important today as it used to be, and I think that's a hard thing for a lot of us to come to terms with, because that has been the essential skill for so many of us. But yes, it does stand to make it easier. And I guess the question is, it's going to make it easier for people who are struggling, but it's also going to make things easier for people who have a really good understanding of the material. And so I feel like rather than necessarily just sort of opening the chasm of sort of the haves and have nots about, in terms of their ability to engage with the material, my hope is that we're going to just, have a rising tide that will lift all boats, and we'll make it easier for people at every level without necessarily doing away with the need for engagement. Yeah.
Yeah, love it. Thank you, Sean. Received a few recommendations on kind of like the online classes from other folks. I'll just read one out, and then there were only 2 panels, so I'll copy paste them so everyone can actually see it. So here's one who teaches remote classes, originally used e-textbook and tried timed short essays based on simulations and discussion boards on Brightspace. Now I give them a choice of traditional discussion boards for older students, or using AI as a tutor line by line, or debate with a college student who has never taken the course. They have to share the link to their conversation and apply ideas from the e-textbook in their responses.
That's great. Yeah, excellent.
Love it. Okay, I know we only have 2 more minutes. Let's try to fit in as many questions as we can in the next minute or two.
Sure.
Sean, how are you considering incorporating information literacy and assessment of AI outputs in assignment design?
What was the first part of that again, Julia? I'm sorry, I missed the.
Oh, no, I just clicked on answer.
Oh, it's okay.
You find it.
No, it's fine. Yeah, I mean, so this comes to, I mean, sometimes it's as simple as just assessing whether or not it's almost sort of like specs grading. Did you do it? Did you, go through at least, 6 different prompts with the AI tool and explain to me how that informed your research question, or how did that inform your reading list? What articles did you identify? Did you actually do the thing? I feel like sometimes it's as simple as that. And then providing the documentation that you actually did it. It's a great, I think assignments like that are a great instance for specs grading. So.
Okay, last question, and then we'll try to take a few questions offline and send out a few like written in an email. So make sure to stay on top of the emails. How do you view the databases that libraries subscribe versus Scite Assistant in terms of research information, given what Scite Assistant is good at as presented on that slide just a moment ago?
Yeah, so I guess the thing I would say is that, the traditional databases are really helpful if you're someone who already knows a lot about the topic. If you know what to search for, Web of Science is great. Google Scholar is great. I actually think that the AI, one real strength of the AI tools and strengths of Scite's data in particular is that, especially if you're using Assistant, you can get answers to questions even if you don't necessarily know all the right terminology. So, our data is going to be very comparable to, in fact, in some cases, more comprehensive than, again, say Web of Science or Scopus. But because we're publisher agnostic and we have access to all that full text data, it's going to give you more of an enriched experience. And it's going to be, with Scite Assistant, it's going to be easier to use, say, if you're a student who doesn't necessarily know all the key magic words to use in a traditional search.
Awesome. Thanks so much for speaking to that, Sean, for joining us today. Thank you so much, everyone, for spending another hour with us. We hope you found this session valuable. And yeah, if there were any questions that we don't follow up with offline that you still have questions about or concerns about, you can also feel free to reach out over the Scite or Research Solutions homepage, and we'd be happy to take it offline with you. Thanks again, everyone, and hope to see you next week on the last one.
Bye, all.